now recognize Mr. Haskett for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bentz, Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Huffman, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Geoffrey Haskett, President of the National Wildlife Refuge Association. The Refuge Association is a nonprofit exclusively focused on protecting, promoting, and enhancing the National Wildlife Refuge System. We are pleased to see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service propose regulatory and policy revisions to maintain and improve the refuge system's biological integrity, diversity, and environmental health. This proposal largely codifies existing processes that the service has followed since the implementation of the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act of 1997, which mandated that the BIDEH of the refuge system be maintained. Codifying and updating the decades-old BIDEH policy to reflect modern conservation challenges, including climate change, is timely and essential. The Refuge Association strongly supports this proposal and the efforts of the service to address the dual threats of climate change and biodiversity loss by codifying and clarifying existing processes and legal requirements for ensuring the ecological integrity of the refuge system. We also note that this proposal is still open for public comment, and there are many diverse stakeholders who are currently providing input, and we believe it's important to allow the service to complete its public comment period and have the opportunity to make adjustments accordingly before considering any next steps. It's important to recognize that implementing BIDEH successfully has been stymied by over a decade of a severe lack of funding and resources for the refuge system. Any discussion about the refuge system must consider the reality that steadily increasing funding needs paired with insufficient budgets has led to a refuge system that is quickly eroding in habitat management and an inability even to keep our refuges open. The refuge system's limited staffing capacity has several negative impacts on the health of the refuge system. For example, only 27% of the threatened and endangered populations occurring on refuges are monitored due to limited capacity. Service these days can only successfully control 7% of the lands infested with non-native species, which has increased 30% since 2005. 60% of the refuge units require a new comprehensive conservation plan or revision, many of which were finalized before the issuance of the original BIDEH policy in 2001. The refuge system saw its highest funding way back in 2010, with an appropriation at that time of $503 million. Today, that number is worth approximately $765 million. Yet current funding has only increased by 4.7% to $527 million, which is only $5.50 per land acre. When accounting for total land and water acres, the refuge system budgets a mere 62 cents an acre. Considering the level of inflation, fixed costs, and increased needs of the refuge system since 2010, the refuge system has been forced to do more with less every year. The failure to offset the impacts of inflation and account for fixed costs has resulted in a refuge system that has long been strained under the weight of critically low staffing levels and lost capacity. This situation is completely unsustainable. The number of full-time employees, or FTEs, already a fraction of the other comparable federal land agencies, is approximately 2,500 FTEs. This decreased by 16% since 2010. No refuges are fully staffed, and more than half of refuges have zero staff on site. Multiple refuges are closed to the public and are completely unmanaged. Staff must manage multiple wildlife refuge units, often traveling over vast distances, sometimes over 100 miles per day. Refuges should not have to make hard decisions every year about how to operate under this long-standing funding crisis. The insufficient funding capacity impacts are felt system-wide, impacting conservation planning, wildlife and habitat management, visitor services, law enforcement, and maintenance. Details of those impacts are included in my written testimony. The association believes the system needs at least $2.2 billion in annual appropriations to effectively fulfill its conservation mission. The President's 2025 budget request of $602 million is an important step towards that goal. We also support the permanent authorization of the Great American Outdoors Act and increasing the allocation of legacy restoration funds. While we're only representing the interests and perspectives of the Refuge Association before the committee today, we also chair the Cooperative Alliance for Refugee Enhancement, or CARE, since its founding in 1995. CARE is a national coalition of 24 wildlife, sporting, scientific, and conservation organizations that span the political spectrum that came together for one shared goal: adequate funding for the National Wildlife Refuge System. The Refuge Association urges Congress to prioritize the refuge system and address these overarching funding challenges to ensure that the service is equipped to effectively manage the wildlife habitat programs and visitorship that rely on the health and integrity of the refuge system. I'd like to also, strong investments made today, so these protected areas are available tomorrow for shifting conservation needs. I do like to submit a supporting document for record from the Coalition of Record Friends and Advocates. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the issues impacting the National Wildlife Refuge System before the subcommittee.
Now, Mr. Haskett, I'd like to come back to you regarding what this committee should be talking about if we cared about the refuge system, the actual issues our refuges are facing. What's the biggest challenge facing the refuge system today?
Thank you for that question. The biggest challenge is lack of funding and resources to efficiently manage the National Wildlife Refuge System. As I mentioned, severe underfunding and understaffing for decades. The refuge system needs 7,000 FTEs to manage its current resources at a minimum capacity, but as I said, they only have 2,500 FTEs across the entire system. So it's funding and lack of it for the refuge system.
Yeah, how does that shortfall affect how the refuges can be used and enjoyed by Americans? We've got 67 million folks that now visit our refuge system. How are they impacted?
So that's 67 million annual visitors. That's an increase of 36% since 2010. But visitor services staff has decreased by 25% during that same period of time. Yet the number of visits has steadily increased by an average of about 4% annually. My specific examples, Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, renowned for birding opportunities, receives 142,000 visitors annually. We can only serve fewer than 1% due to curtailed visitor center hours. Theodore, I can give a whole bunch of examples. I'm not sure you want me to take the time.
Does that critical staffing shortage limit the ability of the refuge managers to take advantage of friends groups and other resources that might be offered up? I mean, if you don't have staff to oversee and implement that, what good is it?
Yeah, there's 200 friends groups across the country that support refuges, and there's many, many volunteers. In the past, volunteers have been able to make up for significant shortfalls that, refuges have been dealing with. But what's happened now is because the staffing is so low, we have some refuges have gone from 20 people to 2, some refuges have 0. There's no one to supervise the volunteers, so it causes a problem even taking advantage of that.
Thank you, Mr. Haskett. Yield back.
My district in California is surrounded by water, bordered not only by the bay, but by the Pacific Ocean on the other side of the district. So I'm closely monitoring the threats posed by sea level rise and climate change. The aforementioned Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge has tidal marshes that will play an important role in protecting communities in my district from rising sea levels. But the refuge itself is threatened as well. Based on our discussion here today, I'm concerned that climate change will only increase the need for more funding to protect these ecosystems. Yet funding for the National Wildlife Refuge System has been nearly stagnant since 2010. So the question is for Mr. Haskett. Thank you for being here, sir. Could you discuss how climate change may increase the need for additional funding to protect the refuge system?
Climate change is probably the largest, most expensive danger looming for the refuge system coming up. And everything that Fish and Wildlife Service needs to do needs to look at climate through any kind of future work needs through that climate change lens. And it's things like there's going to be marshlands, there's going to be open water, there's going to be buildings that are going to no longer be there. We've had a building in a refuge here on the East Coast recently that slid into the ocean because of erosion and different changes from climate change. So the San Francisco Bay certainly is one of those places that will be major affected. I did want to mention, too, that I talked before about, the not being able to keep on volunteers and that kind of thing. Well, Don Edwards just lost their volunteer coordinator at San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which is going to make it even more difficult. So definitely some problems out that way.